What does freedom look like after the revolution? Not in slogans, not in flags, but in something far more personal. A place to live, a place to belong. Across Africa's fastest-growing cities, concrete giants rise for the rich, while the poor build with mud and hope. In Ouagadougou, families sleep 6 to a room, pay half their income for rent, and walk miles for clean water. This isn't just a housing crisis, it's a sovereignty crisis. For decades, African governments waited on foreign aid and foreign investors to solve the problem. But what if the solution never needed to come from outside, in the heart of Burkina Faso? Something radical is taking shape. Not a skyscraper, not a gated estate, but a revolution in brick and purpose. It's called Faso Mayo, a bold new urban housing project launched under the leadership of President Ibrahim Traoré. Not designed for the elite, but for the workers, the teachers, the nurses, the families long pushed to the edge of the city and of society. This isn't just about building homes. It's about building dignity, restoring control, and anchoring a new model of African development that begins with the people, not with foreign consultants. In this video, we go inside the Faso Mayo project to see how Burkina Faso is rewriting the rules of urban living one home, one family, one street at a time. Because maybe the revolution doesn't end at the ballot box. Maybe it begins at the front door. Before there was Faso Mayo, there was a silence. A silence that echoed through overcrowded alleys, cracked walls, and dusty courtyards in Burkina Faso's cities. Ouagadougou and Bobo-Dioulasso, once modest urban centers, are now overwhelmed. Over the past 2 decades, Burkina Faso's urban population has more than doubled, growing from 4.3 million in 2000 to over 10 million today. That's nearly half the country now living in cities, yet the cities were never built to hold them. Each year, nearly 200,000 new people migrate to urban areas, fleeing poverty, conflict, or climate collapse in the countryside. But when they arrive, they find the same poverty waiting just in concrete form. There aren't enough homes. There isn't enough water. There's barely a plan. According to the Burkina Faso Ministry of Urban Development, the country faces a housing deficit of over 300,000 units, projected to grow by 12% each year unless urgent action is taken. And the homes that do exist, they are often too expensive, too far away, or too poorly built. Informal settlements stretch endlessly at the edge of cities, with no electricity, no sewage, and no paved roads. It's not just an urban issue, it's a human one. Families share tiny rooms, sleeping on straw mats, with tin roofs that cook in the sun and leak in the rain. Single mothers work 2 jobs to afford rent. Children walk miles to school because their neighborhoods have none. And when disease strikes or floods arrive, they have nowhere to go. Previous governments knew the crisis. They spoke of solutions. They drafted proposals. But most of them relied on foreign banks, foreign contractors, or foreign timelines. And so, progress remained a theory, never a foundation. The result, urban housing became one of Burkina Faso's most painful contradictions. In a nation rich in culture, courage, and human potential, the people had no place to truly live. This was the stage. This was the silence. And this was the moment when Ibrahim Traoré stepped in, not just with promises, but with a blueprint. A blueprint to reclaim the city for the people who build it, clean it, protect it, and teach within it. A blueprint called Faso Mayo. When President Ibrahim Traoré assumed leadership in 2022, he inherited more than just a nation under pressure. He inherited a broken housing system. But unlike leaders before him, Traoré did not approach the problem with speeches or symbolic projects. He approached it with strategy. At the heart of that strategy was a belief that would define the Faso Mayo project. If the people are the foundation of this nation, then let's start by building homes worthy of their labor. Faso Mayo, which means our land in local Muré, was born from this belief. Not as a one-off construction plan, but as a transformational vision to reimagine urban development not for the wealthy, but for the working class. Traoré's government set an ambitious target: build 50,000 modern, affordable homes in multiple phases starting near Ouagadougou. These homes wouldn't be copy-paste concrete blocks imported from foreign designs. They would be adapted to Burkina Faso's climate, culture, and way of life. Thick walls for insulation, inner courtyards for family gatherings, water access within walking distance, solar integration as standard. But more radical than the architecture was who they were built for. These homes weren't for investors. They weren't gated communities. They were for teachers, nurses, factory workers, and street vendors, the silent engines of the country. For the first time, a state housing project in Burkina Faso was deliberately pro-poor, and more importantly, pro-sovereignty. Faso Mayo was not dependent on Western loans or IMF constraints. Instead, funding came through state-led mobilization, regional partnerships, and Burkina Faso's own public development banks, like Burkindam. Traoré made sure the project would circulate money within the country. The land was state-owned, reducing speculation. Construction contracts prioritized local firms. And oversight was tied to new anti-corruption mechanisms to ensure transparency from foundation to rooftop. Every brick laid was not just a structure, it was a statement that the people who built this country would no longer live in the shadows of its development. The planning wasn't done in foreign boardrooms. Instead, community workshops were held where residents could contribute to design, neighborhood layout, and priority services. Women's cooperatives were consulted on water access and safety. Urban youth were surveyed about public transit and jobs. In the words of one local planner, "We're not just constructing homes, we're constructing the social contract." Even the location was strategic. Faso Mayo was sited on the urban periphery, close enough for economic access, but far enough to prevent overcrowding. The area was chosen for its access to major roads, solar exposure, and proximity to planned schools, clinics, and marketplaces. In just the first year, the project broke ground on over 8,000 units, with an additional 12,000 planned for the following 18 months. Priority was given to families earning under 150,000 CFA a month, and flexible financing was offered through state-backed mortgage schemes at interest rates as low as 2%, unheard of in most of West Africa. By building for the worker, not the speculator, Faso Mayo is flipping the logic of African cities. It's no longer about profit margins, it's about human dignity. Because for President Traoré, the true measure of leadership is not how many towers rise, but how many families sleep peacefully in a place they can call their own. You cannot build sovereignty with imported steel and foreign labor. You must build it with your own hands from your own soil. That was the philosophy driving every nail, every brick, every design in Faso Mayo. From the start, President Ibrahim Traoré made a bold decision. This project would not be outsourced. Not to French developers, not to Chinese conglomerates. It would be built by Burkinabe. For Burkinabe, that meant using local materials. Clay bricks fired in village kilns, stone quarried from Sahelian earth, timber cut and replanted by cooperatives trained in sustainable forestry. Every element of construction was carefully reimagined, not just for cost, but for identity. The result: homes that breathe with the climate of Burkina Faso, cool during scorching afternoons, safe during torrential downpours, structures that are not alien to the land but rooted in it. This approach didn't just reduce costs, it created jobs, thousands of them. From brickmakers in Ouagadougou to solar panel installers trained under the Yellen Energy Initiative, Faso Mayo became an engine of domestic employment. Over 70% of the construction workforce was locally sourced, many of them young. Previously unemployed Burkinabe, now mastering trades they once thought were closed to them. Vocational training centers, supported by the Ministry of Labor and Education, partnered with the project to deliver fast-track certifications in masonry, electrical work, plumbing, and eco-friendly design. This wasn't charity, it was capacity building. And as workers grew, so did pride. "I never thought I'd build a house I could afford to live in," said Usman, a 29-year-old electrician working on the project. "Now, I'm wiring homes for people like me and applying for one myself. Even women, historically excluded from construction, were recruited and empowered. Women's cooperatives produced flooring tiles and ceramic fixtures. Community childcare services allowed mothers to participate in the build. Over time, the site became not just a construction zone, but a microcosm of national transformation. Beyond materials and labor, sovereignty was embedded in the design logic itself. Each cluster of homes included space for community gardens, reclaiming the agrarian rhythms many urban families lost. Wide walkways and shaded corridors reflected traditional village layouts, fostering familiarity and safety. Each neighborhood came with essential services built in: a clinic powered by solar, a school equipped with digital tools, a water station using climate-adaptive filtration, a small marketplace for local vendors. And none of this happened by accident. Traorè's administration synchronized housing with national planning, integrating Faso Mayo into broader infrastructure networks like the Bobo Dioulasso Ivory Coast Highway, the clean water expansion projects, and new fiber optic corridors under PAC Digital. This wasn't housing as an afterthought. It was housing as the spine of a new state. But what truly set Faso Mayo apart wasn't just how it was built, it was why. In a continent where urban development often arrives in glossy packages for outsiders, Faso Mayo declared something radical: that the working class isn't a burden to be relocated. It is the backbone to be honored. That homes should not be speculative assets, but sites of healing, of dreaming, of growing whole again. That the act of construction, done with dignity and purpose, can become a ritual of sovereignty. Faso Mayo is not just bricks and blueprints. It is Burkina Faso laying its future down one home at a time. What happens when you give working people the dignity of space? What happens when the poor don't just survive the city, but shape it? You get Faso Mayo. Barely 2 years since breaking ground. The transformation is already visible. From the skies. Faso Mayo stretches out like a living mosaic, red roofs glinting in the sun, green spaces winding through community squares, schools echoing with laughter, clinics humming with life. But the real impact isn't just measured in buildings, it's measured in stories. Like Awa, a single mother of 3 who spent years moving between informal settlements, evicted, exploited, invisible. Today, she walks her children to a nearby school in Faso Mayo, then heads to work at the community bakery cooperative, an initiative that's part of the neighborhood's self-sustaining model. "It's not just a house," she says. "It's the first time I feel stable." Or Yakuba, a disabled veteran once resigned to a windowless shack on the outskirts of Ouaga. He now lives in an accessible, solar-powered unit fitted with ramps, wide doors, and voice-activated lights. He started mentoring youth in a local carpentry workshop. These aren't isolated cases. According to official data from the Ministry of Urban Development, over 11,000 people have already moved into the first completed districts. 93% of surveyed residents say they feel safer than in previous housing. School attendance in the new neighborhoods has increased by 38%. Women's participation in local economic activity has doubled. Waterborne illnesses have dropped by nearly 60%, thanks to smart water access points and sanitation infrastructure. And the neighborhoods themselves, they pulse with ownership. Evenings bring out elders sharing tea on shared courtyards. Kids gather at solar-lit playgrounds, once a rarity in working-class neighborhoods. Markets bustle with vendors selling local produce. Youth groups host film screenings and soccer matches on open fields. What used to be slums filled with insecurity and state neglect now radiate a quiet but powerful declaration: we belong here. Urban planners from across West Africa have begun to take note. Delegations from Mali, Ghana, and Senegal have visited Faso Mayo to study the model. Development think tanks have published case studies. The African Union recognized the project in its latest urban resilience report. But what surprises most observers is not just the design or the affordability. It's the sense of pride. This is not a rental complex. It is not a temporary fix. It is a homegrown answer to generations of exclusion, and the ecosystem is still growing. New bus routes are connecting Faso Mayo to downtown Ouagadougou. An innovation hub is under construction to train youth in green jobs. A digital portal allows residents to manage payments, report maintenance, and vote in local committees. Because this isn't just housing, it's citizenship in concrete form. And behind it all, one message repeats in the hearts of those who live there. For the first time, the country built something with us, not for us. This is what happens when infrastructure meets intention, when sovereignty becomes shelter, and when a president sees not numbers but neighbors. No revolution is ever smooth, and Faso Mayo, for all its promise, is not without its trials. The early months were marked by logistical setbacks. Rains came earlier than expected, flooding unpaved access roads. Construction supplies, especially locally sourced materials, were delayed due to coordination gaps between cooperatives. Some newly trained workers needed time to meet the rigorous building standards set by the ministry. There were also financial pressures. Without IMF loans or foreign contractors, the state relied heavily on internally generated funds and partnerships with South-South allies, particularly BRICS-aligned banks. This approach guaranteed sovereignty, but it also meant stretching limited resources across multiple national priorities. There were political obstacles, too. Some opposition figures called Faso Mayo idealistic, questioning whether the working class deserved such large-scale investment. Others doubted that locally trained labor could match international standards. But here's what Traoré's government did differently. They didn't retreat. Instead, they learned, adjusted, and doubled down. They added weather-adaptive planning to site development. They created a centralized material coordination office to reduce delays. They increased support to training centers and brought in experienced Burkinabe architects from the diaspora to mentor youth on site. Most importantly, they stayed honest with the people. When challenges arose, updates were shared in public town halls. Residents were not just informed, they were invited to shape solutions. That transparency deepened trust and reinforced a powerful message. We are not building charity, we are building change. And change is coming. The government has now approved Phase 2 of Faso Mayo, expanding the project to 6 additional cities, including Bobo Dioulasso and Koudougou. By 2026, the target is 50,000 housing units completed nationwide, with 60% reserved for teachers, nurses, factory workers, and families earning under the national median income. New funding from the African Development Bank and the ECOWAS Resilience Fund has been secured to scale water access, transport, and fiber optic connectivity within the housing zones. Traoré's administration is also drafting the right to shelter legislation, a landmark policy that would make access to decent housing a constitutional right in Burkina Faso, placing it alongside education and healthcare as a core pillar of national development. But beyond numbers, perhaps the greatest lesson of Faso Mayo is this: infrastructure can be an instrument of dignity, planning can be a tool for justice, and housing, once a symbol of exclusion, can become the foundation of a new social contract. In a world where urban growth often displaces the poor, Faso Mayo is doing the opposite. It's bringing them home, a home not of concrete alone, but of memory, community, and future. So when skeptics ask if such a model can last, Burkinabe residents offer a quiet, unwavering answer. We built it with our own hands. We will defend it with our lives, because for the first time, this country gave us a stake in its future. And in those homes, under those solar-powered lights, the future is already waking up.